Welcome, welcome. Oh, we don't have Marcel. Welcome, welcome, welcome. There we go. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it may be that you are tuning in today, friends. Thank you for joining us once again. This is Get Unstuck. It is our weekly office hours show where we try to help one founder get unstuck in some way or another. Just in case this is your first time here, you can find all of our previous episodes over at foundercraft.com. Oops, got my audio reverb in back here. We are live streaming today, by the way, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, whichever is your preferred place to view us. You can find it, I'm sure. If you want to apply to be on this show with us, we would love to have you. You can go over to ask.fan/getunstuck-apply, a quick way to be on the show. We welcome any kind of problem and any kind of founder at any stage of your entrepreneurial journey. Next week, we'll be back at the same time, 10 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time, 12 o'clock Eastern Time, and then that applies to other time zones, I'm sure. In case you don't know, I am Greg Narain. I'm a serial entrepreneur, done a number of different startups, and I work at Foundercraft with my colleagues here, Marcella and Pankaj. I'll have them do a quick intro as well for themselves.
Great.
Who's
Thanks
first?
again, Greg. Marcella.
Whoops. Oh, crap. I always hit the wrong button. Sorry, Marcella. Go ahead.
Marcella Stein. I have been angel investor and entrepreneur over the last 20 plus years. And as Greg said, we help entrepreneurs get through either marketing or strategic issues in their companies. So we're here to help innovators move forward.
Great. Thank you, Marcella. Pankaj?
And I'm Pankaj. I've been an operator, mostly in financial services companies. I've been an entrepreneur in India, started a B2C company a long time ago, and been an investor both as a VC and angel investor and advisor for funds as well as startups for the last couple of years, working now with Foundercraft on helping founders and funds kind of figure out and navigate through this post-COVID world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So today, we have a really interesting topic with an old friend of mine. Today's topic is actually going to be where we're all going to be sharing some of our stories. I think too often in the world, the journey, the adventure of being an entrepreneur is glamorized by the exits. And the reality is that most exits look nothing like the ones you read about in the news. They usually go down in a way that you don't think or couldn't imagine. And usually that is some kind of failure in one way or another. And today we're going to have our guest and friend, Misha, is going to be on. He recently wound down one of his last company. But today we're going to talk about a little bit about like what happens after that event, right? Not like how do you fail or how does a business die, but really more about what's it like afterwards, right? Like, what do you do next? How do you figure out what you're going to do next? So before we jump into that, I'm just going to have Misha come on and actually give us a little intro about himself, and then we'll dive right into the topic. Misha, welcome.
Hey, am I on? Can you?
You are on.
There we go. Okay. Hey, how you doing?
Good.
All right. So just intro about myself.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'm an entrepreneur. Let me see. Last year at my company, Meograph, we made 3D video tech and a bunch of just mixed media tech from 2012 to 2019. Before that, I worked for McKinsey for a couple years. I went to grad school at MIT, undergrad at Cal, sort of like right in between tech and business, very product-centered founder. And yeah, I met Greg through Media Camp, which we both went through, like probably 5 years ago at this point.
It feels like forever.
Yeah.
Maybe it might have actually been even longer than that.
I think you're right. Actually, well, mine was 2013. I think was yours 20.
I was the year before. I was the first class.
Wow. Yeah.
You're probably 2012. So yeah. So Misha, you're actually like a lot like I think I am. I feel like a pretty good hybrid between tech and business. I was probably never like that formally a business person. I've always sort of been in the product engineering side more so than things. And Pankaj as well, I think is a good hybrid on all three of those. So let me kick it off with the first question. At what point do you stop being an entrepreneur?
When you stop trying, I guess. Like you may stop being, a given company may stop, a given effort may stop, but just because one company that I've had didn't work out, I viewed it as like, well, I'm still an entrepreneur, just kind of like, how quickly can I get to my next shot on goal? So I think you stop being an entrepreneur, and it's totally fine to stop. Like, people's lives change. People have different priorities at different points. I mean, I may encounter that myself, but at this point, I never stopped. It's more just like, when can I have my next attempt?
Anyone else?
I completely agree. It's, if your brain is okay with doing one thing all the time, then you're probably not an entrepreneur, right? And so, funny, my brain went to, probably when I'm too old to work is when I'll stop being an entrepreneur. And that's going to be pretty old, because I already think about life beyond official work and then the things I'm doing next, charity work, what town am I going to change? So for me, the answer is, when I can no longer physically work is when I will likely stop being an entrepreneur, because it's just how my brain's made.
Yeah.
I agree.
Good or bad.
There's two parts to being an entrepreneur, right? There's like the functional part of living it, and then there's the mental part of being it, right? Like, and I think like what you're talking about, Marcella, is a little bit of both, but even more so the mental part, right? Like we're all enterprising entrepreneurial people, and that'll probably never ever go away, right? The reason I asked that question was because when Misha said who he was, he defined himself as an entrepreneur, right? And so that's why I was kind of curious about, would there be a time in your life where you imagine not using that as a way to describe yourself?
I guess when my primary activity was no longer trying to start and build new things. When I did something, if I do something else, then sure. But that's still my primary activity, whether it be companies, volunteer efforts, whatever it is. If you're starting and building new stuff, I think that's when you're being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, totally. Well, Pankaj, what do you think? I mean, you're still.
I agree.
You haven't been building a company for a while, but you're still, I think, entrepreneurial.
Absolutely. I think, as Marcella and Misha both said, it's more a state of mind which forces you to function in a certain way. Being entrepreneurial doesn't necessarily mean building a company all the time. There are other ways to be entrepreneurial. So I think, there are certain people that are entrepreneurial, and they'll always be doing it. And I think a really important aspect of being entrepreneurial is this hunger to like learn and try different things and do different things. And I think that's what drives a lot of entrepreneurs. And then I think the really successful entrepreneurs are the ones who are able to take that and functionally execute on that mindset in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a very emotional sort of thing. And so, Misha, my next question for you is, and for all of us to contribute an answer to, is can you describe some of the feelings after winding down sort of your last company?
Sure. I mean, it's a lot of up and down, and gosh, like when it finally came time to like, hey, we're really not going to make it. We had escaped death so many times previously that you never really know, right, if this is the time or not. It turned out it was, but even then, you still always have this, this optimism. Like even right now, we're actually still having a conversation now about maybe using our tech, that there may be a new use because of COVID and a lot of like remote stuff people are doing. Maybe, right? Probably results in nothing, but you always try, you always hope that like maybe there might be a use for the thing that I built. But I think it was just always a matter of trying to be optimistic and trying to be hopeful, but trying to be realistic too. Like there's there's always, responsibilities that you have. We had one of our employees was on H-1B visa that we went through the whole effort of getting for him. Like it was worth it. He was amazing, and we wanted to keep him in the country, and we hired him out of school. For that, you have responsibilities, and to make sure that he has the time to go find a new employer and be able to roll over his visa to be able to stay in the country and stuff like that. Responsibilities to investors, keeping them informed about what's going on and what your plans are. So I don't know. The feeling was definitely not great. I've never outright failed at something. You have setbacks or whatever, but like outright failed. But then when I started conceptualizing it as you know what it is? I haven't outright failed in my entrepreneurial career. I've just this first attempt didn't work out. I have attempts don't work out all the time. But when I started conceiving it as part of the whole of part of my entrepreneurial career, rather than this thing in and of itself and its own little world, yes, that sucked. And I hate that I lost people's money, and I hate that it didn't work. That sucks. And I hope that one day I can make that up. But when I conceive it as part of my entire career, man, I lose my first one, sucks, but plenty more shots on goal.
I can hear the tinges of that eternal optimism that keeps entrepreneurs going, right? Not in a bad way, right? It's not like you fail, but it's the resourcefulness of knowing how to extract the most value from the things that you've created, right? Company's dead, maybe there's still assets left over though, right? Could we get some leverage on it, right? Maybe the context that we were trying it in didn't work, right? How many COVID entrepreneurs right now, or entrepreneurs who came into this, were thought they were going to go do one thing and now are forced to make those same kinds of decisions, right? And by the way, they haven't even failed yet, right? It just seems obvious to them that they can't succeed, right? In the thing they were trying to do, right? And so, I do hear that optimism. I think it's an important part of the process, and I really like how you framed it. That it's not failing at a thing is not failure, right? It doesn't define you as a failure, right? And by the way, most entrepreneurs will probably fail 10 times in a row. So we're probably the worst critics of ourselves, right? What do you guys think? Oh yeah, go ahead, Misha.
But I was gonna say, when you're trying a bunch of new stuff, what could you expect other than there's going to be a lot of things that don't work? Obviously, right? It's just having the fortitude to continue. That's it.
Yeah. Marcella?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of which of those so many. Agree. There's, as you know, I shut down a startup at the end of the year, beginning of the year, and I talked to someone about it, and I went through the same thing. And Gregorius and I talked plenty during that time because I reached out to him first. And you sit there and you sit in that moment of failure. And as you said, the investors and the people that believed in you and all the things that you've carried with you for 3+ years have to sit in a much bigger context. It's hard because at that moment you wanted that idea to work. But the best thing that I took away from it was the lessons that led to it, right? Because I sat back and said, I knew better here, but I didn't do this. And so you really have to log those in the right place and then move them forward. And as they say about, whether you're an actor and you're auditioning, you got to shake off the audition, whether you're trying to do something be an entrepreneur, you off that failure so that all of the other aspects of your life don't fall within that context. It's not easy, but that's what having the fortitude to try something and move forward is.
Yeah, Pankaj, and a lot of times when you invest in other entrepreneurs, right? And so what's that saying about like past success, sort of not necessarily like a predictor.
Past performance doesn't predict future success, right?
The inverse is true also, right? So failing in the past doesn't guarantee failure either.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And, the common theory is that the more often you fail, the more you've learned, so the more likely you are to succeed in the future. I think whenever you're shutting down a business or a dream that you had, it sucks. And there's a lot of self-doubt that creeps in during that process. And it's a tough time for a lot of founders, not to mention everyone else that's involved, but especially for the founders, it's a tough time. But it's also an opportunity for a lot of introspection. And not just introspection about the business and what could have been, what you could have done, or who you could have hired, but more about who you are as an individual and how you've been able to manage and, the fortitude, right? Like really drawing on that. So I think it's a really, I found it for me personally to be a really important time. The entrepreneurial journey was tough. It wasn't the first time that a venture I started had failed. But what came afterwards was really important for me. It allowed me time to, and none of this would have been possible without the support of my family. It really gave me an opportunity to really look inside and see, okay, who am I and what works? And Misha, like you said, a failure doesn't define me as a failure, right? But initially, when you're going through that process, that creeps into your mind. You're like, well, I'm a failure. I blew this up, but it's not, right? And I think that introspection and really taking the time for that introspection really helps you come out of that stronger than you were before. Unfortunately, a lot of founders don't have that support structure. They don't have the people around them to provide that avenue for that introspection and kind of going through that process, which I think is really important. So, coming back to your question, Greg, about other founders where I've seen this, there's a lot of founders that I've worked with that have failed in their entrepreneurial journeys. And, for most of them, my answer to them is like, great, take some time off. Go do something that you really enjoy. Go spend time with your families, your friends, and really just forget about everything else. For some, it's a lot harder because there are economic constraints to that. But if you can manage through those economic constraints, really just take some time off. Like forget about everything. Go do something that you enjoy, that you wanted to do, that you never got a chance to do. And really use that as a time to look inside.
Yeah, Misha, that was actually my next question. So, would you be open to sharing, what were some of the first things you did after winding down?
Sure. Yeah, gosh. I mean, it really kind of like sort of seamlessly blended from one phase to the other. So it was a little bit of time of just like figuring out what to do, what I had to do to wind down the business. There's still honestly probably things I have to do. There's no real manual for how to actually finish up. So there's still probably to-dos actually. I just started doing things that interested me. I wrote a piece about political history that I'd been meaning to do for a while. I noticed patterns in U.S. presidential history and for a long time and wanted to write about it. And so I spent some weeks just doing some research and writing a paper, which then led me to get interested in politics in the upcoming election. That led me to start a couple things, which now actually went from volunteer things originally to now some things that are even paying me that like have turned into actually maybe small businesses. Entrepreneurs got entrepreneurs. So like I start a hobby and it turns into a small business, right? I'm exploring some of my ideas that may turn into my next company. Not sure. There was, I don't know if the folks here have read it, but there was a book I read last year called Range by David Epstein. And I really liked it. The subtitle was why generalists triumph in a specialized world. And the general thesis was people that have like a weird path to do all kinds of weird, unrelated stuff are often quite good at solving sort of intractable problems, because you can bring analogies from other verticals to new places. And oftentimes that analogy, trying something a little bit differently, that someone that didn't have that sort of weird experience can help. And so, one of the main takeaways was, for whatever you do the next like most interesting thing. And so I've really just tried to do that. Like whatever the next most interesting thing is, it's a volunteer political thing, it's an open source software thing, it's a thing to help one of my friends help on a COVID thing that has nothing to do with anything else that I've done. I'm just trying to say yes and just do interesting work, and the next steps just kind of naturally sort themselves out.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I think I guess what I would say, if I were to describe my years as an entrepreneur, or sort of my last, or probably all of them, but it's like a story of neglect, right? So it's like usually putting off or neglecting yourself in one way or another, right? Like we sacrifice a tremendous amount about or suppress maybe all of our other interests in a lot of ways, right? Like, or at least everything we can suppress, we will try to suppress it, right? And so, and so I had a lot of interest that like had developed or that I had that I just wasn't really in touch with anymore, right? And much like Misha, I got more politically active like over like the course of the last 10 years, or probably started to become active like it never was before, right? And that like for me it was like maybe just being more engaged in that stuff as not even doing anything, I went out and decided, I was like, I've always looked at, admired all these like creators and influencers. Like, I'm going to try and be one now. Right. Like, okay.
That's why I just put these on.
Yeah. So
a major brawl happening outside the store.
Oh,
yeah. So that for me, it was a bit of this, hey, who else am I? Now that I have a chance to be me again, right? And that, I think, like when you said that, it was helpful, and I did have the great support, of my family. I was lucky enough that we had like some severance and some time built into it as well, like for us to sort of take some time. And then, but I will say, I quickly went back to work as well. And to Pankaj's point, I feel like a great deal of, wrongly so probably, of your own self-worth can be tightly intertwined into like the success or failure of your business. And by the way, not just your business, right? Like I think like maybe people take it for granted, and maybe it's only the product people who feel this, or feel it as tightly as I did. But like it is like the validity of your ability to see the world, to understand the world, to have empathy for it. Like as a product person, it's not like just, can I make this like generate a lot of revenue? It's like, do I have the right idea, right?
Well, yeah. Am I smart enough to have figured out a problem that nobody else figured out, and it's real and validated by there being money?
Exactly, and like not all entrepreneurs are product people, right? Or aren't necessarily the originator of the idea, but some of them are great operators, some are great executors, right? And some of them are just very technically brilliant. They participate in other ways, and some different kinds of people can walk away with more satisfaction than others, even in a failure, right? Like, like as a technically minded person, you're like, I don't give a crap. Like I made a technology that scaled to billions. Like it worked, right? Like I won, right? Like, but the person who's like on the business side is like, we're out of business. We didn't win, right? Like, and so you can have those dissimilar vantage points inside of an organization at the same time. And that was my take. Yeah.
Because, and I think the other thing that's so hard as a founder, as an entrepreneur, is to learn how to get the inside of the clock to work, because we've all had co-founder issues, right? So you can be the product person and make the awesomest product, or you can be the best operator or the best salesperson, and maybe that's part of your founding team or not. But man, if those pieces aren't working well together, it's tough. Right now, I have an entrepreneur that I'm helping coach. They're looking for co-founders, and I'm literally like crossing myself for them because we all know how tough those relationships are, and that can make or break that entire process too. And so this journey of self-discovery is also a journey in learning to work with others in ways that are very unexpected. And I don't know, what experience you had in your recent experience with that, but that to me has come out as the biggest lesson of my last round in the world of startups for myself.
Yeah.
And something I'm really exploring next.
Yeah, I think it'd be foolish to think it was a solitary pursuit, right? It as much as there is an intellectual pursuit and there's sort of an economic and business pursuit, there's also like this human relationship sort of thing, emotional thing that's also happening. Like at the same, like they're all blown together. And I feel like maybe too often we think about entrepreneurship purely in the economic terms, right? Like, like it's a binary, like succeeded or failed, right? And we've seen, unfortunately, many entrepreneurs who were successful take their own lives, right? Because like there's other internal stressors that are happening. We've seen people take their lives because their identity is too aligned, with the actual business and its ups and downs or their ups and downs. So yeah, I definitely hear that thing a lot. Pankaj, what do you think? Like, I know you see a lot of entrepreneurs, meet a lot of them. How have you felt or experienced some of this?
Well, I mean, experiences range, but it's a tough emotional time for a lot of people, right? Like sometimes it goes beyond the entrepreneurs, and you really have people that are on the teams that are struggling. They need support. So, as a investor, sometimes the founders are doing okay, but there are other issues that are happening, and you really have to try and help out from a distance. Whether it's making an acqui-hire possible, or just getting a few people on the team to be able to get a job with another company that you might know. So it is a really rough emotional time for a lot of people, like you guys said. And I think generally what I've seen is a lot of for angels it's a little bit harder to do, but a lot of angels do step in, and because of relationships that they've developed with not just the founders, but sometimes other people on the team, they'll step in and just try to help, whether it's just lending an ear or trying to get them interviews somewhere, or just saying, hey, I'll hire you for something I'm doing. Unfortunately, a lot more investors, I think, need to build in. Like you start seeing a lot of VC firms talking about their platform and everything that they're building. Well, one of them should be shutting down, right? And the emotional aspect of shutting down, not just for the founders, but for employees that might be severely affected emotionally from a company not succeeding or not getting acquired, or even people just not getting a soft landing after the fact. So I think that should be a part of the services that top tier VC firms should build and should think about.
Wow,
it's tough.
Never thought of that before. You're right. Do you know of any that are working on that mental health aspects, if you will?
No.
And think about the numbers here, right? Like, 1 out of 10 startups fail, right? There's all these numbers floating out there about, or
every 1 out of 10 succeed.
9.5 out of 10.
Yeah.
Oh man, am I the only one?
I'm that one. Sorry, thank you. And I haven't heard anyone taking on the majority problem in this situation. And I think, Gregorius, I'm about to go on a massive hunt here to see if there are others out there having this discussion, because that's a really great point.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a function of, a lot of larger VC firms that have the resources have built HR teams internally to hire people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll help their portfolio companies hire top talent and source talent, et cetera. So I think it should be a function of that also, because it's a human resource issue, right? And the mental health aspect is ignored by a lot of folks. But I think going forward, I think a lot of large funds that have the resources are going to start thinking about this, and they're going to have to start thinking about this, especially right now, right? Like there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things happening. A lot of companies are going to survive, but many are going to shut down. And it's going to require a lot of support that's probably not built into the system. I think some investors do it kind of just, it happens, but it's not like, hey, we do this for our founders and for the teams at those companies, right? It's not something that investors go out and promote. It's more like, what's that?
They don't want to remind. Well, it's almost like they don't want to remind you that it could happen, right?
Well, also that could be a part of it, but I think it's also people aren't really thinking about it as, hey, this is what differentiates us as a venture firm from other venture firms, right? We know companies are going to fail. We're going to help them through that if they need it or if they want it, right? So I haven't seen anyone that's overtly advertising that as a core aspect of their platform, but I think the smart ones are going to start thinking about that and saying, look, this is something that we're already doing in some way, shape, or form. Let's just formalize it and let's make it as a value add that we provide to our portfolio companies.
Almost like hospice care or like end of life services for startups.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, especially in this day and age, there might be some use for that. With so many things failing. I don't know if you guys saw the news earlier this week that Airbnb laid off like 25% of its employees. And the line that stuck out to me the most was at the end, of his letter. He said, if you're leaving us, this is not your fault. You haven't done anything wrong, right? And you could tell and you can feel how like that strain is there, that pressure is there. And they had the means. They took out actually a tremendous amount of debt to be able to create partially, this kind of landing for a lot of their employees. Yeah. A lot of times when we're, as a smaller startup, you don't have those options, right?
Right.
You're doing your best. You're managing the flow of information so that you don't get people, on the wrong side, or get them too upset or worried or cause them to start looking. But at the same time, you realistically know like the odds are not in your favor, right? And this is one of those situations where it's very challenging for entrepreneurs to really, as much as we embrace transparency, this is one of those times where we probably, try to figure out what we should do and probably aren't as transparent as we can be because we're scared. And sometimes we don't know what to do. And sometimes we honestly don't know. And sometimes we know and we just don't want to admit it.
Yeah, one of the things, Gregarious, that I'm working on with one of my clients, and we're focused on the small businesses in the Latino community, which is, you guys I'm sure have read, or just these businesses are being decimated all over the place. And we won't get into politics, but minorities are just suffering in numbers that are hard to even digest. So when we started to process, we were processing loans for Facebook and Salesforce. Entrepreneurs were coming to us saying, okay, this X amount of money is being loaned to us. Yay, I've got a loan. Now what? And we're looking at them and saying, even if you get this money, that's not going to help you survive, right? There's no way that $2,500, $10,000 is going to get you through this, because this is not a 2-month problem. And so all of these web access that got poured out into the industry don't help if you're not being realistic with the strategies that you're giving them. So now we're looking at, okay, we have to create 3 buckets. Reality is you're not going to make it. So stop spending money in the wrong places, right? Like there's no way your business is going to survive 3 to 6 months of this. So now what? Right? And that's a tough thing to tell someone, right? But that's the reality. As you said, like somebody has to sit down and say, the numbers are not going to magically work out. Your gap analysis was right. And this is what's going to happen. That's one bucket. And so what do we do about those businesses with those entrepreneurs, right? There's some great minds in there. There's some hard workers in there. What do we do with those? Then there are the ones that, yes, if you stretch this out, these are the changes you can make to your business to make it work. And then the ones that are coming up with new ideas and are going to flourish during and potentially post. Those conversations are hard. But as Pankaj said, like sometimes it's just time to, as an advisor, as a mentor, be the person that can sit down and humanely have that moment with the entrepreneur.
And you're going to be the bad guy.
Oh, absolutely.
You're going to be the bad guy. But it's important to be the objective bad guy at times. And, you know, I've had this conversation with a couple of companies over the last 2 months and said, look, you guys really need to think about whether this is something that is going to sustain beyond the next 2 months. And, you know, from my perspective, I don't see it happening, and here's why. Now, if you can come up with a plan, fantastic. But if you can't, it's okay, right? Like, just be honest with yourselves. And I think that's, as an entrepreneur, it's really hard to be objective and honest with yourselves most of the time, right? Good or bad. So I think, like, you know, having good advisors that are telling you objectively what they're seeing is important, but it's useless if you're not going to listen, right? And that's something we see a little too much of also.
No, you're right.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, as an angel investor myself, like how many times have you had that, you know, that conversation? It's like, I just raise a little more money, right? I just need, and you're like, I don't think that's the answer. Unless you're raising 50x more money, because that's just going to give you the runway to test your way out of a problem. But that doesn't mean that's the right path. And it's tough. And as an investor, it's tough because you don't want them to fail, right? But
for sure. Well, I've definitely been, you know, like you raise a little bit more, stringing out a little bit further. But, you know, to be an entrepreneur, we talked about being optimistic, and you need to be, but you can't be delusional. Like at the end of the day, the reality is going to win at the end of the day. And so better to sort of acknowledge that and sort of work within the constraints of, be optimistic, but work within the constraints of reality, because there's no.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was depressing. We did have a question for Victor. He said, do the VCs have a legal responsibility to maintain the mental health of founders and teams? And I know the answer, so I'll say, and should they?
No.
I don't know.
No. There's no legal requirement there at all. But I think the smart VCs will see that this is something that sets them apart from other investors, which should also help them get access to better deal flow, definitely more deal flow, but also better deal flow over time. So it could be a strategic decision, but there's no legal liability for that, right? Like, at the end of the day, you are an investor. You might be sitting on the board. Most investors don't take board seats, or most investors aren't sitting on the board. Larger investors are sitting on the board, but so there might be some legal liability for the board, but not for the investor themselves.
Yeah. So my next question is, how did you eventually move on, right? And Misha, you're still in the process figuring it out, but even now, there's some glimmers, right?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on some of the things you're trying now, like, and sort of like,
Sure.
what's the new validation process? I guess that this is a thread you might keep pulling.
Well, so one thing I learned, you got to apply your lessons from previous companies. And so I've always been pretty good at building products and building good products. What I haven't been good is making sure that people actually want them before building them. It'll be the best product that you absolutely don't want to do. And so
no one's ever had that problem. You're unique.
Right. And so I'm really trying to learn my lessons from that. So, one of the things I'm doing is applying, selfie filters like the Snapchat puppy lens to politics. Pretty simple for the 2020 election. No one had done it. Brand new medium. Started a group, and now that's actually turned into like a thing where there's some money involved, and we're like reaching hundreds of millions of people with this new medium, and it's fun. It's just something. I'm not trying to have a career in politics or something, but just it's kind of an interesting thing that scratches an itch of mine. Also looking at doing virtual political rallies right now because of COVID. You do this one thing and it leads to, oh wait, there might be something else here that could be interesting. And right now I'm about to send a bunch of emails validating, do we think that political campaigns probably care about this, not having the ability to get people together, but let's actually test. So this kind of technical validation and market validation at the same time. I'm doing this other thing, which is this open source software project to do a decentralized project management system or a networked volunteer project management system for decentralized teams. Thread I've been pulling on for a while, and some of the concepts may lead into my next company, but I'm not constraining myself by if it needs to or not, if it ends up being profitable for me or not. It's just try to just do what interests me right now. And at the very least, it's a good way of spending my brain, and getting to do stuff. I can, support myself in the meantime. And probably by focusing on what's interesting, it'll lead to my most profitable thing ultimately. But let me just do what's most interesting for now.
Would you say so? I see this pattern quite a bit. So I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the last point you made, which was that it feels like this doesn't feel like the constraint in other places. Like, so I think like if you're starting clean and it's not post another startup, I feel like for me as well, there was less of a monetary thing and more of a fun thing, right? Like sort of like was the lever I was more advancing, right? Like and it feels like the funnel of profit and sort of viability as a business takes like longer to get to in this, like when you're post a startup, I think, than like when you're maybe initially going in, right? Because like you said, like where most of us start, and all of us here are product people, at heart. And most entrepreneurs, I think, are product persons to some degree, right? You start with like some notion of a capability or a gap in the market, like that's worth solving, right? And then we imagine thousands or hundreds of ways to solve that problem, but we start because we know like there's a gap, right? And the thread that I feel at least in common, like what you're describing, was like I went for what I think is fun. Right, like even when I was talking to investors, and they want me to go in a different direction, I was resistant to whatever direction they wanted because it wouldn't be fun for me, right? As much as because not because I didn't think it wasn't a viable business. It's like if it's not going to interest me, like I know I did 7 years at my last company, like I know how long I'm signing up for something, right? And so yeah, like I feel like you get the luxury to some degree of saying, no, I'm going to do what I like doing. Like you now know, I also want to do something I like doing, because God knows, like I don't want to be scooping dog shit up for like the next 7 years, even though that could be a profitable business. It's not the thing I'm going to want to do, right?
Well, how much is scooping this dog shit paying? Let's not be too hasty.
$1 more than you ever dreamed of.
Oh, okay. All right.
I went through the same thought process because, I had probably a whole week of, I'm never doing this again. I'm done. I'm going to create a resume. That's why I called. I was like, can you help me with my resume? And he was like, what, the what? Like, you're doing a what? Can you say that word again? I'm like, no, I'm done. I'm just getting a job. And as I was going through that process, I couldn't do it because there was an offer to do something very lucrative on the table. And I've literally pictured myself walking through the process of going to that job and doing that thing every day. And it was interesting. And it would definitely had brilliant elements if I would be traveling and using my brain in new ways. But it was the same thing every day. I can't do it, right? There's no value at this point in my life that would allow me to do that to myself. And that's eye-opening, right? Because if I was 24 and got that offer, I would have jumped on it and made the best of it for a couple years, made a lot of money and been happy as hell, right? But that's just not how I tick now. And I really only, even advisory or even consulting clients, I don't want to take something on that isn't of interest. Just don't.
Of course. But Greg, one thing I'll add though, is that I actually was planning to, before COVID happened, go and try to PM in big tech for a couple of years because I'm an entrepreneur. It's what I want to do, want to continue doing. And I actually may, now that things have changed, I may continue down that path. But it's also about being able to step back and reassess, be like, okay, well, I just spent 7 years doing a startup. I need to rebuild my finances back up. I need to rebuild some not energy reserves, but relaxing a little bit while still making a nice living. I can re-up my skills. I can re-up my network, which I haven't really been focused on building while I've been focused on my startup. And so now that COVID has happened and there's hiring freezes, honestly, one of the things I'm working on may just lead into my next startup, and I may never go and do big tech. I may or I may not. But it took me a while to come to, from an ego perspective, the willingness to work for somebody else and draw my, would be a very nice paycheck with my skill set and my experience at one of these big tech companies. And and it's such a privileged position to be able to be like, oh, do I even want to do, this kind of job? It's amazing to be able to even have that kind of,
I'm so glad you said that, because a couple of times that we've been talking, I'm like, we are really privileged to even be able to walk through these decision trees. And I'm glad we're recognizing that on this call.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But so, I may still do it, but yeah, I don't think there's any shame. And it took me a while to get to that point of what I hope is maturity of being it can be, it's not about the immediate next step you take necessarily. We can fool ourselves thinking the immediate next step is oh, I'm going to do this other thing and thinking we're going to come back and we never do. But if that's what happens, presumably we made decisions along the way that led us to that point of where we ultimately wanted to go. So I don't know. It's all lots of balance.
And to be fair, I don't think any of us would go work somewhere for the paycheck unless it was also exciting, right? Mm-hmm. That the project itself was exciting. So it's okay, but we wouldn't go somewhere that wasn't being innovative.
Yeah.
And that was really my point, that I wasn't looking at going somewhere innovative. It was a job. And so it's okay to take a job for those of us that are product people or entrepreneurially minded, if it's an exciting, innovative place where our minds are at their best. And then that's great, right? Yeah, and if it allows for the money and all that other stuff, then fantastic, send it my way. But
yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's really only a handful of places that probably most of us would consider working.
But you bring up a good point, whether you've had an exit and you have money in the bank or not, an entrepreneur and taking the sacrifice of that paycheck over a long period of time is draining on your family, on your energy, financially. And it's important, how do you eventually move on? It is important to decide whether or not you're willing to do that again from a financial standpoint. Because we've talked about the mental health, but there is also that financial push on your family to keep doing it because of retirement planning and college planning and the things that you're expecting will build up in these crucial years. So that should not be ignored as you're thinking about moving on, being very, again, honest about whether or not you're willing to continue that financial risk.
Well, yeah, and I think it's fair to say, like, no matter what, all of us are bootstrapping again if you do decide to start something, right? So you still, presuming you have the ability to do that, right? You're still going to have to figure out how to do it with the minimal amount of resources, and maybe even the minimum amount of time, because you have to take a job and do something else, in the interim. In the book that I will probably never finish writing, I write. My book's called Minimum Viable Person. It's like a product manager's guide to life. And one of the things I talk about, I use the analogy of stakeholders, and to Marcella's point, which is that, like, in product, we have multiple stakeholders. Well, in your life, you have lots of stakeholders as well, right? And so, your investors, your family, your loved ones, yourself, right? We are all stakeholders, and we have a vested interest in sort of the success of you as a person, right? There's also a tremendous amount of debt. And like you said, it's not only financial debt, but a lot of us do put ourselves in financial risk in the process. But there's still emotional debt, mental debt, like all these other kinds of debt that we accrue in the process of running a company that we got to come clean with. Shutting down, like we said, winding down is not just like, pay your taxes and return the money. It's make good with your family. It's like get yourself back to a healthy state. Like there's all these other things that actually have to happen and should happen, reasonably before you sort of endeavor again right back into the fray of things. Yep. Well, we're getting close on time. We got about 5 minutes left. This has actually been a really good conversation. I'm really happy we had so many, interesting points of view. I think failure is a common trait that probably all entrepreneurs can relate to, right? We've had it in our past. It's a common experience, in an abstract way, at least, right? Not necessarily all the ins and outs of it. Any closing thoughts from folks before we head back out?
I think failure is always in context. Like you're always failing in something. Like when you run an A/B test, A or B is failing. You're failing things all the time. And so, I tend to just view it as you do small little failures internally to experiment, and failures are just experiments that didn't work out. So as long as it's within context, as long as you're willing to keep running experiments, it's all just part of the process. And it sucks. It hurts for the ego in the meantime. But as long as you can, let go of that stuff, it's all just kind of fun and just figuring out along the way.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about actually this topic this morning, and I said, look, every first person that got up at the top of the diving board belly flopped at some point. You still landed, you still fell through that water, you came out, and then you got back on and tried again. And at some point, the dive looks really good. It's not perfect. You still land in the water, get out, try again. That's entrepreneurship, right? And that's how it works. And so rinse, wash, repeat. And hopefully in between there's a point where you feel like you're building something, and success is over the long term. It's not one thing.
Yeah, I want to echo what, Greg, what you talked about a little bit about your book that you're never going to finish. I think entrepreneurship is a team sport, right? And it's not just your co-founders. It's your family, your loved ones, your mentors, your advisors, people that you worked with in the past. And, I think like keeping that team involved, keeping that team active is something that's really, really difficult when you're building a company. And it's even harder when it's failing. Your gut is telling you this is failing, but you're still going to push ahead. Getting that team involved is it's hard, but it's something that you kind of have to do along the whole process. And there be different people on the team that are going to be involved at different levels. The depth is going to be different, but keep them involved. Keep people close to you, aware of what's happening. Be honest with them and be honest with yourself, right? And they'll help you be honest with yourself, which will help you get through some of the more difficult financial situations that might occur. It might help you get through some of the more difficult emotional situations that occur. So I think really just, keeping that team close is what I would say is important to do.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much. It's been a really great conversation. I'm sure we will have many of you, all of you, back in another permutation of this to chat about something else. Misha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Misha.
Always a pleasure. For everyone out there, we appreciate your time now, or if you're watching it later, you can find the episodes back over at foundercraft.com. Once again, if you do want to be on the show, feel like you have something to contribute or a story you'd like to tell, we'd love to see you. Come on down to ask.fan/get-unstuck, and we'll get you into the show.
It works. I feel less stuck already.
All right, my friend. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Take care.